welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversation, the space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. There's so much in parallel with tech and art. For instance, there's innovation that starts in all small steps, iteratively leading up to total radical exploration. A lot of people today blend creative arts together with principles grounded in ethics and emerging tech. To be at the intersection of all of this creativity and build versatile careers across entertainment, media, business, law, only teaches us that anything is just a step away from learning afresh. I've got just the person with me here who went deeper into a lot of those subjects and who's with us here today to exchange some of her thoughts.
Before we go into the episode, let's hear it from our first sponsor. Build in Public Fellowship is a vetted community and a 6-week cohort-based course designed by KB to help ambitious founders and creators accelerate their Build in Public journey together with strong accountability, supportive community, and hands-on mentorship from KP himself. The fellowship is a global melting pot of members from world-class accelerators like Y Combinator and On Deck, bootstrap founders with over $20,000 monthly revenue, professionals from companies like Google and Goldman Sachs, all committed to launching or growing their projects in public. You'll be surrounded by fellows who've launched a podcast, started and exited multiple companies, built a newsletter or Twitter audience of hundreds of thousands of people online, and they'll have your back just as you share your journey and build in public fearlessly. I was a part of the second cohort and I absolutely loved it. I got to meet so many creators. I got to build alongside with them and share my journey. Go through fireside chats, taking lessons from KP and also other creators from across the world who shipped amazing stuff. I highly recommend it. And there are scholarships as well. The next cohort kicks off on August 7th, but only has limited seats. So apply ASAP at buildinpublicfellowship.com.
Abigail Hingwen has mastered technology and storytelling, formerly leading emerging AI tech at Intel. She is a New York Times best-selling author. She's authored about 3 books, and she's a media producer and a filmmaker as well. She writes and speaks about tech, AI ethics, women in leadership, and transforming culture. Hi, Abigail. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And it's been fun just chatting and between us again.
Absolutely. You know what, like just researching about your background gave me like so many points. And when I was just thinking about, okay, what are the different topics I should be touching today? I'm like, it was like a kid in the candy store. I'm like, I wanted to talk about this. I wanted to talk about this. And then like, there are so many topics. So let's start. And I can't wait to get you all through those couple of themes that we have.
Sounds great.
Awesome. So from graduating as a lawyer and working for Senate to right now, being into media and writing, and also having chapters of working with tech and AI. Looking back, what are some moments that you can recollect that brought you here?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. I think people often ask me, similar types of questions because I've had such a diverse career, and I've actually now worked in almost every major kind of the big pillars of industry. So in government, in finance, tech, now in publishing and Hollywood. But I would say there are definitely consistent themes that have brought me to this point. One is, I think, just the theme of social justice. So my family is from the Philippines and Indonesia. I grew up in Ohio, but I would go back to visit the Philippines when I was a child. And I remember just, really being struck by the big disparity between, that world and the world that I was living in Ohio. In the Philippines, I remember the exchange rate just being like really kind of shocking. I would go and get these pretzels that were like 30 cents. I think they're Auntie Annie's pretzels that I think come get for like $2 in Ohio. And I remember seeing slums as a child and just being really shocked, like to see these pots full of corrugated metal and these kids that were my age running around barefoot. But I kind of, and I didn't see my family there. So I think I grew up with this innate sense of what the world is really disparately divided between the haves. So that was something that stayed with me throughout my years through school, through Harvard. It's what led me to law school. it's why I went into government originally, because I wanted to talk about these like issues and address these issues of injustice and inequality. So I think for a long time I was trying to figure out the right vehicle for that. And so there was government, there was law. I actually remember on a research trip to China that I did in college, I was struck how businesses actually reach people in some ways that the government didn't. So I did a research trip in China when I was a student at Harvard, and I visited a factory that made paper products. They were making paper products for takeout, actually. And I remember seeing the factory workers, like how they, how they lived, how they worked, how they ate their lunches, and being struck by businesses actually reach people far more intimately. The place that they work reaches people far more intimately than the government laws and policies that are being created out in Washington, D.C. or Beijing. So I think that's kind of partly what got me started on the path that I ended up taking for a long time, which is financial services and venture capital, working with startup companies. Like, business has a role to play in social justice. And so, through those years, I would think about how do we increase access, democratize access to capital? Like a lot of, women and minorities didn't have to capital historically, and it's still true today, actually. And so I think that being kind of playing out even in my writing. So now, like I have published 2 novels, a third is coming in November, and I have many more novels and 3 projects in the works. And I think in all my works, there is an aspect of social justice and diversity, of just kind of expanding our understanding of who people are. There's neurodiversity, there's cultural diversity, there's socioeconomic diversity. And I think those are just things I just try to bring to the world to showcase.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's the best thing when you explain to me? Even though for somebody who's hearing it for the first time, to connect law, business, tech, art, even though these might look like, different facets where you get explored, once you explain, there's a lot of common thread that would come through, which is having that sort of an access and sort of equality when it comes to both, whether it's tech or whether it's capital, just having that sort of equal standards for everyone and to be able to connect and pursue what's capable in each person's capacity. I think those two are what I hear when you explain to me about your story. So it's amazing that you were able to make that impact in each of the spaces that you took in. So it's super good to dig deeper into different aspects. So thank you so much for sharing that, Abigail. Awesome. So I think let's go into the writing pursuit of yours, because we were just talking about how you had, 3 books, and if I remember, it's also like a strong decision that you took to go into writing while you were heading a team back at Intel and working with emerging tech, which currently, people talk a lot about AI, and I think you've been involved in that space for quite some time now. So how did you trade with this sort of difficult choices? Like, how did you know that, okay, this was the moment that I had to go full in, or this is when I had to put my energy in? So could you elaborate on those patterns and those directions that you had to deal with when you pursued writing alongside your tech career?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that there's kind of 3 big choices that I had made in my career. The first was to become a law professor. So that was 16 years ago now. I graduated law school. I'd done everything to get onto the market to be a law professor. I was at Columbia Law Review, I was an executive editor. I wrote an article, a student article that won a national award. And I was picked on the DC Circuit Court of Appeal. So, and was then at the law firm. So the idea is that you go to a firm for a couple of years and then you write an article and apply to faculty positions. And I just couldn't bring myself to write that next article. I felt like 5 people would read it. It wouldn't move, but I had this idea for the fantasy novel sitting there in my head. And my husband is super supportive. You're so excited about this. Well, let me just try it. And I was like, well, so how do you just try it, right? You just try writing a novel. And I tried it and it just came pouring out of me. Whole novel. It was like 60,000 words, high fantasy, and boy going through a portal. And, in retrospect, there's a lot of things kind of derivative. And although there is an element that's actually super exciting that I still have to explore, that novel is so works. My agent actually loved it. But that was how I kind of cut my teeth. I didn't even know I was creative, but that was already. But it took me many years to break in. It was before Crazy Rich Asians with Hamilton, opened up the world to one of their stories. So I was working along in my regular career as a lawyer, finance, venture capital, emerging technologies. But at the same time, I was writing at night, 9 to 12 every night. I ended up doing an MFA program, which is a distance learning program at the Vermont College of Fine Arts that it was like 25 hours a week. It was all my weekend. I spent all my holidays going to campus to like the 2 residencies twice a year. And I just kept growing. I kept writing. I wrote 5 novels on the way to Love at Taipei, which is my first novel to publish. And then I had subsequent novels, but as you know, the book became film, which is called Love at Taipei. It's now coming out Paramount Plus this summer. And about 2 years ago, I decided to leave my corporate job. So that was actually the third pivotal point. I skipped over the middle. I'll go back to that stuff. But I did leave my corporate job to pursue the creative world full time. And I haven't been able to since. But I will say along the way, and I'll go back to like the second pivotal moment, I found that it was hard to juggle both. It was hard to juggle the writing, raising young children, and the corporate life. I was working at these big law firms that you could work 100 hours a week and still not be done, right? So I did make the hard choice to take a smaller legal job. I went in-house at the time, and at the time it felt like a really big decision. Like everyone's like, oh, you'll never be able to practice big law again. Like all the big decisions are done at the law firm. And I went and my retiring, I put it, and it's been great because I ended up being able to push to the business, which actually was better still for it. I got to see all the new technologies kind of things and went in-house to the venture capital equal position, which actually gives me, which put me squarely into like the heart of what Silicon Valley does. And then I got to see all these cool companies just grow and incubate and bunch of risk takers that, were failures just a step along the way. And all that was encouraging for me in my writing journey. So that choice to take a step back from the big legal career, so I could basically family and do more writing and kind of open up more capacity, I think was also kind of what gave me the space to be where I am today. But, that was a hard choice. And it definitely came with some cost on my legal career that I think I had to struggle with for several years.
Yeah. And it's very important to also recognize what are you leaning towards. So I've had Christina Wallace, who's a professor at Harvard, talk to me about portfolio careers and this concept where what you do eventually leads you into multiple pursuits of interest. And it's also very important to cater to those interests and try and see what leads you into which direction. And I think in your case, Abigail, that's exactly what I hear. Because you started with something like, let's say, law, and then that eventually led you into pursuing tech. And you had your whole good ride with the tech career space. And also, you didn't want to let go of something that you had innate talent for, which is to start writing. And I'm so glad that you had, folks encouraging you in terms of like, I'm not willing to give up on your voice, but sort of like figure out what's the voice that's coming out of you and how can this be molded and shaped further to other extents. So, and I loved your kind of the relatability you brought in with venture capital and writing, because I think a lot of times we have founders and people that we have seen in front of our eyes, risks, who sort of like willingly give up a lot of things to pursue their interest because that gives them joy. And I think it's so evident that in the case writing gives you joy. And I'm super happy to see writing, not just like bandwidth writing, but like going beyond filmmaking and a lot of other things, which we'll discuss in the next couple of minutes. But yeah, it's wonderful. Cool. So now we were just talking about writing and what made you enter into this phase and how hard it was to juggle a lot of your decisions and your choices to go with the writing field. So we talk a lot about community because with tech, I think today it's you take a PM role, when you take a founder's role, there's always a community that you can fall back to. There's always a set of people that you can go and sort of have them as firstly board of directors and tell them, hey, I have these questions. I just want to bounce the talk with you and see what your thoughts are. So for somebody who's been from the tech space and entering into a totally different career like media, how is the kinship in the media space? Because this could be like very helpful for a lot of people who are willing to break into a media career. And your answers and how did you find your inner critic circle who gave you that encouragement? I think that would be a great story to hear about, Abigail.
Yeah. I would say there was like multiple communities that I've really drawn support from over the years. My critique partners, I really credit with like how did I get to this place. So my critique partners I found through a variety of ways. I met IW and Gorio, I mean, well, through SCBWR, we met, and she was a medical student resident at Stanford. And I think I was practicing a lot of big firm. And, we were similar in the sense we both had these very time consuming careers, but we also were writing in adult novels. So we began exchanging work. We would meet like once a week, exchange 15 pages at a time, and it grew over time. So some people came in and out, but Sony Mukherjee is another who joined us soon after that I still trade works with. And then I met Sumit Tahir, who actually just won the National Book Award and the Prince and a whole bunch of other honors this past year. She wrote the Emperor and the Ashes series, and then her most recent book, All My Rage, the big award winner. So, but this is before she's even published, and we were like, she has taught me so much about writing. Stacey Lee, who wrote her Downstairs Girl, it's a Reese Witherspoon club pick, and Kelly Lowe Gilbert, whose new book just came out this week, actually, and Stephanie Garber, who wrote the Carolyn series, and I love that series. So they were all published before me. And I remember just feeling at times like, wow, why do you guys still read my stuff? I don't know why. I wasn't breaking through. I just kept getting rejected. I would come close. I came close to two of my manuscripts came close at a big publishing house. Couldn't get through marketing. Again, it was before Fraser Jayden, right? And it was honestly just really discouraging. But then my book broke out. But, I really credit them for keeping me going, for contributing to the Lugboat book. Like they critiqued it at one point. It got rejected at draft 26. About like basically picking up, put me back on my feet, dusting me off and saying, okay, let's look at your manuscript and figure out what needs to get fixed here. And, the rest is history. So my writing group is really, I think I give them all the credit for keeping me going. And then there's just, as the book was coming out, the Asian American community really came around the book. They're excited for the excitation. They love the book, what it stood for. The movie is creating a lot of new young stars that will have long careers in Hollywood and talent behind the camera as well as with every camera. All of them, I want them to all go on and do like great things. So that has been a wonderful community as well. And since the book came out, I've just been meeting thousands of people who offer to support, and I am just so grateful every day for all of them.
Yeah. And it's definitely a very explicit feeling when people send you messages. They send you how the book has changed their life or what they really enjoyed about the book, how relatable it was. I think the relatable part would really resonate with you. And for me, when Corey tells me that, hey, I listened to this episode and I think it really resonated with me, I think that's the one ultimate goal that you feel all that work that you did is like getting the culmination, right? So I can imagine how great it is to get that sort of validation and those best wishes from people. And Joe really drove this very important point of not discounting on that immediate circle that you have, right? In terms of like always having a trusted set of people around you. And those writing exercises was excellent because most often when it comes to managing things, getting started with the first few steps to pursuing something, people discount heavily on those practices and principles that you have to go with. So I think this writing practice sounds like it gave you that momentum to write longer and more by just starting to write with a couple of pages every day and having this circle around you to support you. And yeah, I remember reading about this circle in Deborah's book where she was mentioning about how this circle was definitely, pushing you to pursue a writing career full time. So I have a follow-up question here, Abigail. So for somebody who's like budding, let's say we know a lot of people who are in the tech space and who enjoy tech as much as they can, but they also are, let's say, pursuing some sort of a creative talent they have inside them, which is either to paint or to write or, other forms. So for them to find that sort of a crowd or that inner circle to trust on, what some steps that you would suggest from your experiences? Things like reaching out. And so do you have any such thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I would say you're totally not alone. I remember when I spoke at a lot of tech companies, with each book launch, and I will do it again with the film launch and with the third book launch. And I remember actually a lot of women came to me like, were you embarrassed to say that you're working on a romance novel, right? Did that make people respect you less? And it's actually not a romance novel, first of all, it's a romantic comedy. But I said, initially, yes, I was a little worried and there were some people probably who were like, what are you doing? But, to be honest, a lot of people came out of the woodwork when they found out I was writing a novel. And a lot of men came out of the woodwork saying, I'm secretly writing a novel too. And how do you get published, right? So I think when you are just being yourself and doing what you love, like that itself is like a steadying source of presence and inspiration for people. In terms of like finding your tribe, I think you have to put yourself out there. You have to, like, as you said, you ask someone, hey, will you exchange 50 pages with me? If they're full, like, because a lot of people, like, for me, I can't actually exchange 50 pages with most people anymore because I just have so many other things. I have my critique partners. But like, if you find people are kind of in a similar stage as you and you put yourself out there, you exchange work, and you kind of give it a time limit, like, let's just do 15 pages. And it's a low commitment. And you find out, do you resonate with their comments and vice versa? Like, do you like their writing? Do you resonate with like the themes and the goals that they have? And when agents tell you that this is a subjective business and when they're, sending me their rejection letter, it's so true. It's really subjective. Like, you just think for yourself, like, you and your friends probably have similar tastes, but you probably disagree on some movies. Like, your friend might love one song and you hate it. And they love a certain, like movie and you hate it. And that's fine. Like, that's like why we have a diversity of a film, and books and stuff. And so that's the same thing with agents and reps. Like, they have their loves and dislikes, and you just have to find the right people that fit what you're trying to do. And that does take a long time. I would say it took me probably, 5 to 10 years to build my community of people. And I continue to build it now in Hollywood with like new creative partners in different mediums. So now I'm talking with illustrators and animators. And again, it takes time just to, like, you meet like 10 people and you find maybe one person that you have chemistry with. I remember one of my mentors, who is a very, strong leader in Hollywood and tech. She said, like, and it's even harder if you're a weird, strong woman to find that person, those people that you connect. When you do connect with them, it's like super strong, right? It's just like you hang on to each other.
Yeah, no, very true. And I can totally support that. It's like spending so many years to find that one good connection. And you would like completely lean on to this person because the amount of time it took is equivalent to the trust and sort of equation that gets built with both of you. So I think that's very important. And what you mentioned also is like this point that most of them don't realize, right? Because they're not always in it for the long term. So I was like, yeah, I want to do things, but I also want it tomorrow and I want the outcome to show up tomorrow. So for the longer game, I think both relationships and the skill in itself that you're pursuing grows and ages as you spend more time with it, make it sort of a habit. So I think, yeah, that's a very good point that you made in terms of finding the right kind of people who are at the same level as you and not be shy enough to be vulnerable, right? Because like you said, my agent does not accept this. So what's the best way do I deal with this? Do I write more? Do I write it this way? Is my style okay? So I think a lot of these get cleared when you talk to people who are peers and people who are also traveling the same journey that you're on. So yeah, very, very
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. So I think now that we're getting a hang of what writing career and what establishing a space in media looks like, let's shift ideas to AI. Because I know that you've been involved with AI for more than a decade. So you've overseen the emerging AI tech at Intel. You've also worked with AI partnerships. And I know you've also been a fellow podcaster in the AI space. So there's so many things along with also doing a little bit of venture capital work in this space. So how would you see current founders who are trying to build in the LLM space? What would you suggest as a structure or a pattern for them that they need to consider before on when they start building out with AI? Because, now everybody wants to build with AI. It's something like the shiny thing that people all want to go after. So what's even the practical thing to consider and what would you always spot? Because you've had such a vast experience from all of these spaces, right?
Yeah, well, I had Andrew Ng on my podcast, who is considered one of the godfathers of deep learning. And, he said that he actually very early on in his career on AI, he and his friends tried to challenge each other to think of an industry that would not be affected by AI. And initially thought, well, maybe haircuts, like, you still need to go to the barber and get your hair physically snipped. But even then you could apply AI to the appointment system or, like invoicing or something, right? Like there's lots of, or, there's lots of ways that every industry can be improved by AI. And so I think like really the first step is just to figure out how would AI impact my industry? And part of that is just be familiar with what are the tools out there. It's true. Like I'm kind of shocked actually by how much AI generation has just suddenly taken off. Like I wrote a novel about AI generation in 2015, and it's like so timely now. I pulled it out and I'm doing other things with it now. But I think with Chat GPT, everyone is just like, it's all the rage now. And there's more coming. And I do think it's actually finally catching on. But and I think that a lot of people can get involved. It is accessible now where they can think about like, how do I apply AI to the particular field that I'm in. So I think that's the easiest starting point. Even people that are very tech savvy are thinking of how do I apply this to like creating, better products or streamlining my workflow or my pipeline. There's a lot of cost savings that can be exploited that we're just beginning to touch.
Right. So I think, yeah, comes back to fundamentals, right? Like what's the best thing you can do here and how does this apply with whatever your existing stack is or whatever problem you're already solving for. And that's like, I think you really have to go back to what you wrote back then, because whatever I think we would have dreamt or imagined is already happening at a 10x scale right now. And it's only going to get more better. And I would say like more scarier also in the next couple of years. It's like something super interesting just unfolding in your front of your eyes, right? So it's amazing. And for the listeners, Abigail writes excellent stories that are like combining tech and humor. And I think the fact that reading her books is like super tech savvy. And we just had like a crypto conversation just before, starting this podcast. And I think I'm like, oh, wow, that's like super cool. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if her next book is again going to be based on AI stuff. And this time I would probably say more like generative AI and how a lot of NFTs and stuff would be involved. So yeah.
Yeah. So my second novel, which I think you're referring to, it's one of the Love Boat books. It's a companion novel called Love Boat Reunion. And Sophie Ha, who is my crazy, like boy crazy girl in book one, has doubled down on becoming like the best CS student that Dartmouth's ever seen. She's kind of swung in the other direction. She's sworn off boys. And she is actually a girl in tech. She's a girl in AI where she's trying to create this fashion AI app. Anyone can work in AI, including this very girly girl who's actually brilliant. And she just needs to come into her own and, be free to be herself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you're combining these multiple stories together, right? In terms of, since you've had this background in tech, it's kind of giving you that leverage to visualize what it means to pursue a career in tech. And also at the same time, imagine what would it be to give other layers to this character and kind of bring everything together in one picture. So I think that's the most interesting part. And to me, I think characterization is very important as we go into original writing. I think giving those depths to the characters are very important. And I'm actually glad that you're able to do that with your experiences in tech. Awesome. So now that we're talking about AI and the way that founders would be evaluating and seeing what's the best thing to build, there's also currently, I think, two kinds of AI that we can look into, right? One is the infrastructure level where different companies are figuring out how to build apps, how to build on top of whatever the current stack is. And there's also like the consumerization of AI where we as consumers use those applications and we play around and see what's the best way we can gain more knowledge in this space. So with a lot of data that's being involved both at the company side and at consumer side, what are the steps to ensure fairness, transparency, and accountability? Because I think tech ethics is going to be the hottest topic ever. It's always been though, and I can see it continuing to be one of the main things of focus going forward because it's like how ads used to be at one point in time, right? It kind of like given all the data and we became the reason that ads started growing. So I try to see the same thing with AI because there's a lot of data being involved. So what's your take on how to maintain the ethics and transparency?
Yeah, no, this is a really important question. You're right. I do a lot of speaking on AI and ethics. And I think it's everyone's responsibility. Everyone working in the field, everyone who's being touched by AI to speak up. They have to speak up about their experiences. It is both like there are like AI ethics boards that are created a company, but you can't outsource the responsibility because a lot of times by the time they get involved, the technology's already been built. So it's really that people on the ground building, designing, like it has to be ethical by design from the get-go. And it's the responsibility of those kind of frontline engineers to surface problems if they come up. And how is it that you identify these problems? I think the key is we need a diverse group of people working on it, because if you're all coming from the same background, you won't notice things that are different. I'll give some real life examples, but this is important of why you want to have people who can say, hey, this facial recognition technology does not work on my darker skin. You actually need someone to be able to say that. And, here's an example from the real world that's not AI related, but I remember when I was a young associate at a law firm, we were all given $1,000 a year to spend on business development. And I remember at one point, there was I'm not sure his role. I think it's kind of like an office manager, but he said to me, he's like, well, I see that you're spending your $1,000 on baby shower gifts. What do baby shower gifts have to do with business development? And I was actually really shocked. I'm like, well, I gave these baby shower gifts to women who are like really ambitious and smart, and they're going back to work. So it's not like, but he could not fathom, like in his world, that did not fit into business development. He thought business development was like ball game tickets or, nights out at the pub and getting beers, right? And no, baby shower gifts, these are actually business development. And like, it's true. Like today, these women are still like out there. They're like managing partners. They're deal makers, and that's an example where you have to educate along the way. So you have to, if you are like the developer, you've only seen like one world, you need to bring outside input in. And there are a number of nonprofit organizations that are doing really great work in this space. And so if you don't have that diversity on your team, first, you should go get it. But second, you can also ask for input from places like the Partnership on AI is doing really great work. A lot of companies now have like fairness and AI groups that are doing interesting research. So, give people a voice, seek out input, get yourself educated, have AI ethics be, if you can find a business tie-in, like a reason, and there is, right? Like if you build it right, like find the profit tie-in for these things, because that, I think if you have everyone's incentives aligned to trying to build and design the most ethical products, then it will naturally come. But if the incentives are created by the leadership are not conducive to that, then it's harder, right, for those rank and file engineers to speak up. So I think the bottom line again is everyone is responsible for the pipeline of AI technology as it's developed, deployed, and used.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times this responsibility from everyone's side is always thought in a very single-handed way, right? It's always thought about as, okay, so what's the best thing we can do with the algorithm? What's the thing that we can fine-tune in the tech part of it so that this works? But a lot of what we just discussed about is more like cognitive bias that people, we as people have. A lot of times it's psychology driven more than it's technology driven. And as much as tech, that's on one side, I think a lot of this psychological biases, I remember how there was a time that just very coincidentally to what you mentioned, there was a time that the resume picker used to leave out all the women resumes and always like the men resumes for certain roles. And that was again like AI.
There was a big headline.
Yes,
that was a big headline.
Yes, exactly. And I think that was the time that this calling out happened, where everybody came together and sort of called the bias out and said, something wrong is happening. And this was at a multinational company that was like having a separate diversity and inclusion team, and folks they're being responsible for it. So as much as I think very importantly, how you said it, as much as it's important to grow tech, it's also important to understand that as each person's biases and as each person's truths come together, it's very important to see what's not really okay and what's not something that can just be passed on as, okay, this just goes here, it's fine. I think it's important to call those things out, and that's like the first step towards getting it fair. So yeah, on that with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So now going a bit more into what we were discussing as AI has just transformed everything. So since you work in the creative media space, I've just got like a fun game for you. So let's say creative media industry meet AI. What are the top ideas that bounces off your mind? Like what would shift creative storytelling or film production or writing books and scripts, which is something that you do often these days. So what are some top ideas that bounces off?
Yeah, well, as you may know, it's a really hot topic right now. It's one of the key points of negotiation with the Writers Guild strike. I think there's definitely concerns about copyright violations and, what is the future? I think this is very, it's not uncommon to see this whenever there's a big technological shift, and AI is a huge technological shift. And I think my message to creatives is like, what AI does is the stuff that's not creative, right? And I think everyone understands that AI is going to replace or rote work. AI cannot replace the creative work. And so it's actually really important for creatives to get on top of this. Like they should understand these tools. They should weaponize themselves with these tools, not in the sense of like, world annihilation, weaponize in the sense of making themselves stronger and better and faster and more efficient at what they already do and what only they can do. And I really think that that is so important because it is true that AI is taking over a lot of jobs that will go away. Like we no longer have elevator operators. There's I still like, I think of a story from Grapes of Wrath that I read in high school. I think it was Grapes of Wrath, where the young man stood and defied the combine that was coming to harvest, right? Because it was taking the jobs of the harvesters. And there was eventually there's this gruesome scene where he's able to stop it the first time because it's driven by people, but the second time it's driven only it's a fully automated machine, and then it mows him down and he dies, right? And I remember just being really horrified and struck by the story. But the point was like he was standing against a tide that could not be stopped. And I think that's where we are with AI. Like it's the cat is out of the bag. And it's really important for us to kind of keep up and get ahead of it, understand like how is the world shifting around us, and how can we be the ones taking leadership, especially, creatives, I think, see the world more clearly, because that's kind of the lens that we bring our lens, kind of our close read to a lot of things. And like with that clarity of vision, like we should be taking the lead on the use of this very powerful technology.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And has AI been very helpful for you in any of these fronts? Because I think what you mentioned is right in terms of replacing those road works, because now your entire time can go into focusing on what's the best way to get creativity out and what are different methods to get your skin upfront. So have you used AI in some of your creative pursuits in the recent times, and where it's helped you?
It's interesting. So I'm actually working on I'm just starting out with a film short that has an animation portion to it. So I'm playing around with runway.ai, which was used in Everything Everywhere. I have just started to play with it, but one thing I was able to do was take different images, plug it into runway.ai, and have it interpolate like what does the video look like using these 4 different images. And the 4 images were actually all like, there were different points on a time lapse of a painting being drawn, and it actually filled in all the gaps of like,
Oh, wow.
the painting. So for me, I'm using it for pre-visualizations, because pre-visualizations it's just for my benefit. So I can think about like, okay, what would this world look like? And, I have live illustrators and animators that are getting hired onto the projects, but it helps us to work more efficiently. Like, okay, does this work? Does this work? And it just kind of gives us a common language to use. But the quality is definitely not the quality. It's not production quality by any means. It's not even like as good as like a regular previx would be. But for my kind of quick and dirty sketching, it works just great.
Yeah. It's like how people call the whole MVP thing with respect to product building, right? Like that's the first step you do to understand if it's really working, if it's something that the minimum level of getting users to use it. And I think then you get full going with the product. So I think I see that as a similar way as well. And since you mentioned about Runway is one of my favorite AI tools as well. I love putting things out. And as in your case, you talk about how you visualize video. I think I do a very similar thing with imaging. I try to put one image and I try to like extrapolate the image and do infinite imaging, see how the image can look like from multiple dimensions and sort of do cityscaping. So it's super fun to play around with. And especially if you're a creative person, I can't emphasize enough as how you mentioned in terms of it helps you see broader perspectives. It helps you see, oh, wow, that's like a different thing to think about. And let me go and discuss that with my illustrator, or let me go think more on that. I think it gives you so many levels to put your thoughts on. So yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's another
Yeah.
tool that I think everyone's using now. I believe it's a Google photo tool where it will remove background people from your image. So, I took photos in Vienna where I'm currently speaking to you from Vienna, Austria over the holidays. And there were like all these background people, and you can actually just tap on the images and they
Yes.
disappear. The phone knows what that background scene looks like. It's been photographed so much that it could just fill it in. So, it's like little things like that. So those are all AI tools, but, and we think nothing of them. They make the creative's life easier.
Totally, totally. And I think as podcasters ourselves, we would know how much AI helps with editing stuff out and fine tuning wise and sort of doing all those little post production works. And those areas I definitely see it's boosting creativity, if not anything. And whenever somebody brings to me in terms of, okay, AI is just what it replaces, I think it's just like another whole dystopian kind of a thinking or another world to totally go into, because like we do see the upfronts of how AI could help us in a lot of ways that we ourselves function in. So yeah, for sure. Awesome. So let's go back to what we were discussing, Abigail, with your book writing and how you combine these different layers of tech into fine tuning your characters, your storylines, and kind of sort of like giving you so much of a jump from one interest to another interest. So what's this lens of storytelling that you view with? Like, was this kind of a tech driven storytelling very intended? Is that something that you think is more like your unique voice? And what would you tell creative people who are just honing your skills to do to find their own voice to get into creative?
Yeah, no, I think you've really hit it on the head. Like everyone should write what they know. And I think that's really true. And you can write what you can research, which is also what you know, it's like what interests you. That is really, I think what I love is when people find that unique contribution that they will make to, the world. Like what is the story that only you can tell? What is the voice that only you bring to the table? And no one can replace that. Definitely not AI. So for me, I just happened to enjoy technology. I remember when I went to Harvard, I came from Ohio where I just, I didn't really get exposed to technology that much. I remember there was like the one guy who would be on the internet. I was like, what's that? Right. This is 1995. I graduated from high school. And then I went to Harvard and there were all these people who were like working at Microsoft and Netscape at the time. Right. And I was fascinated by it. I'm like, that's just so cool. I didn't know people my age could do this stuff. And so I think I've always just had this fascination with tech. And even when I worked in the government, I worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I was there when they held the Microsoft it was the AOL Time Warner merger hearing, right? Yeah. And like everyone was so excited about Time Warner, this very old media company purchasing AOL, this hot new startup, which is, it wasn't a startup and it was large then, but it was just like a really exciting space. Like where just a lot of innovations were happening, a lot of really bright people were moving into it. So I think as I just grew up in that space in my career, it just naturally found its way into my stories, especially girls in tech. But also, I think there's so many fun. I love puzzles, like so that also finds its way into my stories. Like characters who are good with puzzles, who are good with solving the problems, and all that goes into the same skills that go into being a good software engineer or someone who builds algorithms. And
yeah. And no wonder I think some of those like really hit it off well with screenplays and film producing projects as well, because it's like how tech doesn't stop with just storytelling, right? And all forms of storytelling can adapt this. And for me, what's more heartening about this is a lot of people who think tech is very, very traditional, right? When you just come into tech, it's a lot to do with, okay, I'm just going to like code. And I think that's the only path out there. And with every decade, we had different forms of roles and different forms of tech jobs being created. And it's so satisfying to see how tech can go beyond just working in tech, but into stories like these, which will last for a lifetime. And this is like read by teens and young adults. And I think it sort of gives them a way to look at tech from a very different lens and sort of like induce or inculcate this desire in them to work for tech. So I think what you're doing is really amazing with respect. I see so much potential with how this can impact on good careers, can help people really fall in love with tech. So yeah.
Well, no, I'm glad. I hope so.
Absolutely. So your audience, this will become like a full curve though, Abigail, because I think from working with tech folks that you've had with all your Intel and partnerships, AI, and then working with founders with venture capital, and now you're working literally working with young adults and teens. So, what influence was there from all of these different facets of audiences? And did you have interesting learnings at each phase?
Yeah. So, I think I've worked with young people my whole life. I remember when I had kids in a show, I was really intimidated. I'm like, I don't know how to like manage children. I know how to talk to college students or, young adults. So
Mhm.
I think that it's always just been a sweet spot for me. So my writing is for young adults, but on the other hand, my books are read from people ages 13 to 90. I love the story of like the 60-year-old girl reading my book 10K with her 90-year-old grandmother. And, I remember a 50-year-old woman interviewed me. She said, "What I love your book so much, even as a young adult." I'm like, well, young adult's actually misnamed. Young adult today is actually what I think adult was when I was growing up in middle grade, like a wrinkle in time was middle grade, but now would be, so I was a young adult, but back then, but now would be considered middle grade. So part of
Mm.
it's just a misnomer. But I do love Gen Z. Like I've connected with so many Gen Zers through the books, and I love I love their passion. I love what they stand for. I love that they've grown up in a world where they don't put up with anything. And
Awesome.
I feel like I'm encouraged by that.
Yep. Yeah. Awesome. That's so good to know. And I think as a mother, it definitely like gets you to relate more with this audience at this present point in time because you have more like a live reality that's running along with you, and you're like, okay, so it's like an experiment that I can go with. So it's so good to see so many factors coming together, Abigail. And thank you so much for being here today, for sharing a lot of these points in tech, in storytelling, in arts and media. And like I said, I think the good wraparound for me to get back to the beginning of what we spoke about is how there's so much possibility you try to bring in with your career. And from the time that I read about you on Depth Book to actually talking to you right now, I think it's so surreal to just see how many different directions your career could take you through. And yours is like the excellent example that we can refer to. So thank you so much for being here and sharing all your stories with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation. So be well and good luck to everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.